Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the live interactive sessions on circular dichroism and Mosby spectroscopy. So, this is our ninth live interactive session. So from the last eight interactive session, we have started discussing on Mosby spectroscopy. So we briefly discuss about the particular week's lecture contents, and then we solve some assignment questions related to those topics that has been covered in the same week. So in this ninth week's assignment, we will be talking about Mons-Based spectroscopy. Um, I hope you guys are following the recorded sessions. um, I request whoever is following the recorded sessions to join these live interactive sessions for your benefit, because you can ask your doubts, whatever issues you are facing in understanding this circular dichroism and Moss-based spectroscopy. So, in today's session, we will briefly have a discussion on Moss-based spectroscopy, uh, the line width thing, all the fundamentals of Monroe spectroscopy. We will talk about isomer shift, quadrupole splitting, etc. And then we will be solving some questions on that. Um, Before that, I have some notes. As I said, on Mosby spectroscopy, the some previous class note, like when I last took this course. So from that, I'll be briefly discussing about the topics, and then we will be solving the questions. I hope these sessions are helpful to you, and you're getting your doubts cleared from recorded lectures, or if you can join the sessions, that would be great, because we want the sessions to be interactive at the end. So, okay. Uh, we'll wait one more minute if someone has to join, because I usually wait up to 6:05 if someone has to join. And I would like to say, if you join in the middle of the lecture, for example, after 30 minutes or 1 hour, it gets difficult to kind of interact directly, because I'm in the middle of explanation of certain topics. So for that, if you join in and you want to catch up with what we are discussing, you can just stop me in between, and you can also write in the chat box. Okay, so it's 6:05. Let's get started with our today's session. So in the last session, we talked about this. We talked about how. So in Mosby spectroscopy, we generally have a source atom. We generally take 57 cobalt for iron, and then there is a iron base sample. For iron base Mosby spectroscopy, iron sample, like Mosby spectroscopy of iron samples, we take 57 cobalt as the source, because after electron capture, it decays to its 57 Fe, and then from its 3 by 2, I equal to s- nuclear integral, sorry, nuclear spin state 3 by 2, it goes to its ground state 1 by 2 by emitting gamma radiations of certain energy, and those gamma radiations are absorbed by the sample to get excited from its ground state, nuclear spin state 1 by 2 to 3 by 2. So, what we discussed in the last session was about the concept of recoil energy. So, when this heavier atom, 57 cobalt, which then get decays to 50, which get decays to 57 Fe. So when it emits gamma radiations, and the sample, when it absorbs those gamma radiation, that energy, there is a certain pushback, like there is a certain loss of recoil energy. For example, when you sit in a boat, for example, you're on a deck and you want to sit in a boat, so you are stationary, like you are at a stable position. But when you put your when you want to move to the boat, it experiences certain amount of like change in momentum. So that to balance the momentum, if you are going in the boat, it will kind of push back. So there is this loss of recoil energy. So here it is not, the source is not stationary, it is also it also kind of it moves back. So it is like losing energy. So you can imagine it like this: you have two boats, so you have to move from one boat to another boat in a pond. So when you jump in from this one boat to the another boat, what will happen? This boat will move towards, and this boat will move backward. So there would be certain balance of momentum while the energy is being transferred from one body to another. So here the same recoil energy loss happens. So because of loss of recoil energy by source and gain of recoil energy by sample, the transition, this E transition, you can see this E transition energy is transferred. E transition energy is equivalent to energy of emitted and absorbed energy, like exact energy from I nucleus spin state to 3 by 2 to 1 by 2. So this is E transition, but this E transition, so what happened, this gamma radiation, this gamma radiation energy ER, it has to be sum of this E transition energy plus recoil energy or minus recoil energy. So source loses the recoil energy and your sample gains the recoil energy. So this gamma radiation is basically E transition plus minus ER for source and sample. So this gamma radiation has to be higher than your E transition energy, because of the loss of recoil energy, and you would want that there is minimal recoil energy loss. So, because for example, your source has an energy, your source has energy this, and then your sample has an this absorption spectra. So, to avoid loss of recoil energy, Rudolf Mosbaer introduced the idea of putting these. So, before that, uh, there should be the max for any energy transfer to happen. There should be maximum overlap of energy between source and sample so that there is minimal loss of energy during this transition. So uh, we would want that there is recoilless transition. So the famous scientist that we discussed about in the last session, Rudolf Mosbaer, who got the Nobel Prize for this particular spectroscopy, so he gave this idea that to avoid the loss of recoil energy, uh, source and sample nuclei, we should put the source and sample nuclei in a solid crystal matrix, which will increase its effective mass and hence a decrease in recoil energy. Because your recoil energy, if you see, your E is p square by 2. Hello, Surendran. Can you hear me? Okay, so we are discussing about the Morse spectroscopy, the fundamentals of Morse spectroscopy. I wanted to ask, are you following the recorded sessions? Have you followed the previous sessions? Uh, can you please answer? I want the session to be interactive. Okay. Okay. So in Morse spectroscopy, when we put the source and a sample in a solid crystal matrix, this recoil energy is decreased, and this process is called recoilless event. So energy can produce and hence better overlap between source and sample transition. So the maximum energy emitted by the transition from excited to ground state is transferred to your sample, because your recoil energy loss has significantly reduced. So now your E transition is a mean contributing factor in the transition uh, energy transfer. So in Mossberg spectroscopy, transition from one nuclei to another nuclei is involved, but not all nuclei in periodic table can undergo Mossberg transition. That is, not all nuclei are Mossberg active. So why all the Mossberg, like all the atoms in periodic table are not Mossberg active? That's the question we will be talking in today's session. So So this periodic table shows you how many of the atoms, how many of elements in the periodic table are Mossberg active. The blue ones are Mossberg active. No, and all of them actually. The ones which are highlighted with blue, yellow, violet, green, and orange color. So these are Mossberg active. So, nuclear resonance absorption can only be observed when the difference of transition energy and emission are similar to the sum of line width. So, we will talk about this line width now. So, if you see, we all have recorded absorption spectra, or we must all of you might have studied about the absorption spectroscopy. So in UV visible spectroscopy, you observe a broad Lorentzian shape band, and we kind of get a broad Lorentzian shaped spectra. So the question one would ask is, why don't we get a sharp line band in the absorption spectra? Why is it not a very sharp band like this, or just a line? Why it is something like this? Why it is a broad Lorentzian shape band? So we expect a line band. So this is what we expect. But what we get, a Lorentzian band shaped spectra. So line width of a Lorentzian band is generally measured at 50% absorption. Like this is the maximum absorption. This is your maximum absorption wavelength. The wavelength where you observe your maximum absorption. So this is your maximum intensity, or you can say maximum absorption. So 50% of this, you if you measure, So that is what you call your line width, which is represented by this symbol tau. So we observe this brown Lorentzian profile because of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which says delta x into delta p is greater than equal to h direct by 2. Delta x is uncertainty in position and delta p is uncertainty in momentum. It says that when we can't define both position and momentum of a it says that we can't define position and momentum of a particle simultaneously. That is, at one time we can define only one parameter precisely. So if we talk about delta x, if delta x is 0, that is, we are saying that position of the particle is 0. So delta x here, it could be one dimensional. For example, we are talking about the point, or we are talking about space. So delta x is like x, y, and g, the position dimensions in all the directions, like all the three coordinates x, y, and g. So if you say that the position of if position of the particle is 0, then your delta p, the momentum, would be infinite, and we would not be able to precisely define the momentum of our particle. So this uncertainty principle basically talks about four dimensions. Here we are talking about position and momentum. Position is basically x, y, and g, three coordinates, and momentum is your fourth coordinate, which is time. So if x is saying, talking about three dimensions x, y, and g, your momentum is talking about your time. So then the momentum, which is based on fourth dimension, that is time. So we generally find out the complementary or canonical conjugate variables. It means if we have two parameters which can define all the different dimensions, so we have to find out, similar to your position and momentum vector, you have to find out any other two parameters which can define the four coordinates, four like the space coordinates x, y, g, and your time. So it means if we have two parameters which can define all the different dimensions, then all the different dimensions possible to explain that particular system will be known as complementary or conjugate variables. So x, y, g, and time dimensions are four dimensions. So a similar or conjugate variable as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So it's not just your it's not just your Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where you if you can't define the position, if you can define the position, then you can't define the momentum. So you can define only one of the parameters precisely. But this also exists canonically in other variables also, and that is in energy and lifetime. So a similar or conjugate variable as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle are delta E into delta T, energy and lifetime variable, which are also complementary variables. So your Heisenberg uncertainty principle says delta x into delta p is greater than h direct by 2. And in your energy gap, which is the gap between your ground state and excited state, and delta t is your lifetime. So lifetime says how long a particle is going to stay in the excited state, and that depends on the energy gap. So if your if you excite a particle from ground state to excited state, and you have to find out for uh, this is your delta E. So, and uh, for how much time it is going to stay in the excited state, it is your delta t. So delta E into delta t is greater than equal to h direct by 2. So if your energy gap is very high, your lifetime, the time for which your particle stays in excited state, is very less. Delta t, that is lifetime. in excited state. If your energy gap is very high, your lifetime is very less. But if your energy gap is very less, your delta t is going to be high. So now, what happens in absorption spectroscopy? We cannot precisely define both energy gap and lifetime of a particle. There is always going to be finite energy gap and therefore finite lifetime. Because if your delta E is equal to 0, that is the energy gap between your ground state and your excited state is going to be 0, then your particle will stay in excited for undefined time, which is not true. Okay, so there is always a finite energy gap corresponding to which there is always a certain finite lifetime for which your particle stays in the excited state. So for uh, different energy gaps between your ground state and excited states, you will get a Lorentzian band. For you to get a line shaped band in absorption spectroscopy, delta E has to be 0, and that makes your delta T undefined, which is not possible, what we discussed. So it means we are going to see some line width, and hence there will be finite lifetime. So this is delta E is equal to uh, tau by 2 line width, which is half absorption at maximum. So delta E into delta T is greater than H direct by 2. If you substitute delta T by this tau by 2, you will get uh, delta E into tau greater than equal to H direct. That line width will never be equal to 0. That is, we won't get a single line in the absorption spectra, and we are going to see some line width, and hence there will be finite lifetime. So this is going to be important in Mosbaire spectroscopy. Why? That we will be discussing. So for Mosbaire spectroscopy, the line width is 5 into 10 raised to minus 9 electron volt. And why is that? Because for 57 Fe, if we are talking about the 57 Fe nuclei, for transition from excited state 3 by 2 to 1 by 2, the lifetime uh, of 57 Fe nuclei in excited state nuclear spin state 3 by 2 is 141 nanosecond, which has been calculated. And so if you substitute this lifetime, which is 141 second, you will get your line width, which is this. So your tau, this is your delta t. So from above, you know your uh, delta t value, the lifetime of your particle in excited state, you know about that. So if you put that value H direct by uh, 141 nanosecond, you will get a line width of 5 into 10 raised to minus 9 electron volt. So now, and the line resolution, you have to find out the corresponding line resolution. So line width by delta E, your transition, we know the like energy gap delta E. So you substitute it 14.4 into 10 raised to 3 electron volt. So your whole value delta, your tau by delta E, it is going to be 3.3 into 10 raised to minus 13 electron volt. So you can say you get a line, you get a line of very low resolution, that is of 10 raised to minus 13 order, which means in this transition of 14.4 into 10 raised to 3 electron volt, the energy gap we are trying to find out the shift in energy bands on a resolution order of 10 raised to minus 13 electron volt. So resolution is something, for example, if you see any transition, how can you kind of see the differences? For example, whether the transition has happened or any changes has happened in spectra. For example, if you have an absorption spectra and you do something, like there are blue shift and red shift you have studied about. So if you observe, when you do absorption spectroscopy, you observe a shift of like let's say 50 nanometer, 100 nanometer, 10 nanometer, at least you can observe that. But here in this Mosbaire spectroscopy, the resolution is very low on a magnitude of 10 raised to minus 13, such that for any changes in the spectra, you would have to observe the changes on an order of 10 raised to minus 13 electron volt, which is a very low resolution. So it means that not all isotopes can show good signal. Then what makes a particular nuclei Mosbaire active? That's the question we had to ask. So this is where we reached. Uh, if line width is, in optical spectroscopy, we are talking about absorption spectroscopy. So in optical spectroscopy, your line width is 10 raised to minus 8 on order of energy transition. The delta E is zero point 0.1 to 1 electron volt, and hence the resolution line width by energy you get a change on an order of uh, 10 raised to minus 7 to 10 raised to minus 9 like on around 1 to 100 nanometer difference you get. But in Mosbaire spectroscopy, your line width is 10 raised to minus 9, then your energy gap is on order of 10 raised to 4, so you get a shift of on an order of 10 raised to minus 13, that is zero point 0.1 picosecond, which is a very poor resolution. It means we need to have a system that measure a change of wavelength on an order of 10 raised to minus 4 difference less than optical spectroscopy. So imagine, if you can observe a change of 1 to 2 nanometer in absorption spectroscopy, in Mosbaire spectroscopy, you have to kind of measure the difference on a 10 raised to minus 4 order lesser. So we require a high value of resolution for Mosbaire spectroscopy, and for that, line width should be high value and your energy gap should be low. So these are the two conditions that we have to satisfy. That is, your line width should be of high value and your energy gap should be low. So condition one, if lifetime is less. So this is the canonical conjugate thing we have just now discussed. Line width into delta t lifetime. So if your lifetime is less, that is the time for which particle stays in excited state. If that lifetime is going to be less, then your line width is going to be more, and that's what you want. That you want a higher line width. So excited state lifetime should be less for high resolution. The second condition is, your energy gap should be low. That is, energy of transition should be low. So and for corresponding to that, the Mosbaire spectroscopy active elements which have the less energy gap between their nuclear spin states, one by nuclear state, ground state to excited state. So those, the most commonly studied nuclei in Mosbaire spectroscopy are 57 Fe, 119 stainless tin, 121 Sp antimony, 129 iodine, and 197 gold. So these are the commonly studied Mosbaire active nuclei. uh, and from that, the very prominently we study about 57 Fe, that we generally study about iron and tin based systems in through Mosbaire spectroscopy. So 57 Fe has a natural abundance of 2.14%, artificial enrichment of sample is done before analysis. So before analysis we have to do the artificial enrichment of the sample because its natural abundance is very less. How the source of Mosby spectroscopy is in excited state and emitting gamma radiation on transition to its ground state, and how do we get 57 Fe isotope? So that is the question we discussed about it in the last session, but let's get back to it clearly. Um, so for this, how do we get our source 57 Fe and then use that radiation, gamma radiation emitted from it to excite another 57 Fe sample? So what we take a parent nuclei which is 57 cobalt, and it undergoes a nuclear reaction. So we know that 57 Fe, just now we discussed, if we want to directly use 57 Fe, which has a very low natural abundance of 2.14%, then this spectroscopy is going to cost us this is going to be very uh, costly, not very economic. So for that, 57 cobalt, which is naturally abundant as it is, and it is also radioactive. So 57 cobalt is radioactive and it is prepared from naturally abundant 56 Fe sample by bombarding it with deuterium. So your 56 Fe is your uh, very significantly found in the nature. So what we do, we take a 56 Fe, we bombard it with deuterium, and then deuterium is basically uh, your 2H1, like the isotope of hydrogen. So here you bombard your 56 Fe sample with deuterium, which is produced by cyclotron. We will talk about it just in a minute. So it produces 57 cobalt plus neutron, one neutron. So, what is cyclotron? A cyclotron is a type of particle accelerator which propels a beam of charged particles, protons, in a circular path. These are widely used to accelerate charged particles in nuclear physics experiments and use them to bombard atomic nuclei. So, your 57 cobalt isotope is produced by bombarding your 56 Fe nuclei, which is naturally abundant, with deuterium produced by cyclotron. So we get our 57 cobalt isotope, which is radioactive, and it has a half lifetime of 270 days. So this 57 cobalt, which can be stored for up to 270 days before it decays uh, to its 50%. Uh, so this 57 cobalt relaxes uh, it relaxes to form 57 Fe by electron capture from environment. It goes from 57 cobalt to 57 Fe by capturing an electron from environment, which is its first nuclear transition. That is, it undergoes from its nuclear spin state I equal to 7 by 2 to 5 by 2, and then it further transits from its nuclear spin state 5 by 2 to 1 by 2 by emitting gamma radiations of energy 136.32 kilo electron volt. Then further, it decays from its I equal to 3 by 2 to 1 by 2 that is ground state with nuclear spin number 1 by 2 to give an energy of 14.4 kilo electron volt of gamma radiations. So, which is used in Mosby spectroscopy. So two gamma rays are emitted in the process. First is of energy 136.32 kilo electron volt, and the second one is 14.4 kilo electron volt. So how is the experiment done? So we just now discussed that we tie our source and sample in a solid crystal matrix to to have a higher effective mass and to have a recoilless energy transition to avoid the loss of recoil energy. Because of this, in this I have written and this recoil-less transition ensures the maximum overlap of between the source and sample. So if we want to avoid this loss of energy, we introduce the effect. There is another effect that we introduce, Doppler effect. Doppler effect is introduced so that there is absorption of gamma rays emitted from source by sample. So now what happens? This is your source, and this is your sample. So if your source and sample are such that uh, uh, we want to reduce the recoil energy, so what we do, we put the nuclei in a solid crystal matrix, and we move the source and sample towards and away from each other, which is with a certain speed. So such that to have a maximum overlap between the source and sample line widths. So the when there is a maximum overlap in the line widths of the source and sample, there would be maximum energy transition. So let's say if we start from here, when your particles, so for example, if your source and sample are away from each other, that there is that is they are away from each other, and there is no overlap between their line widths. So the transmittance, the energy transferred from the source is being transmitted maximum. It is most of the energy is transmitted and not absorbed by the sample. But when your source start moving uh, towards your sample, they start their energy, their line width starts to overlap. For example, initially they are at this position. Okay, so this is this position, and then the source moves towards the sample. So certain energy overlap starts happening, and that energy is absorbed by the sample for the transition. And then there comes a point of maximum overlap, such that there is maximum transfer of gamma radiations emitted by the source to the sample, and hence there is zero or no transmittance of energy to the environment. Then your source, it kind of overlapped fully with your samples, and then it starts moving away. So it is coming from firstly it is coming towards, then it is moving away your source. Okay, so it comes here and then it moves there. So then again there is the transmittance energy transfer to the environment, transmittance to the environment happens, and no overlap with the sample, less overlap with the sample start happening. So your source moves from here to here, then here it overlaps and then moves away from your sample. So this is your Doppler effect. That is by movement of your source or sample towards from towards each other or away from each other can introduce the transfer of energy between them. So this velocity change due to Doppler effect will give us idea uh, about the absorbed energy by the samples, such that the velocity is a function of energy. So now in Mosby spectroscopy, we talk about four different parameters. How many signals do you get in Mosby spectroscopy? Then what will be their positions? Position of signal in the Mosby spectra. This is what we call isomer shift, and it is defined in millimeter per second, because on your x-axis we have velocity, which velocity of your velocity with which your source or sample is moving towards or away from each other, and it is in millimeter per second. Then multiplicity of signals. Firstly, you the first parameter says number of signals. First parameter. Second, what is the position of the signals? It will be here or here. And then the third is multiplicity. What is the splitting of the signal? It is singlet, doublet, triplet, or multiplet. And then fourth is quadruple splitting constant. What is the splitting between these signals? So these four factors we will be discussing. Before that, we had a brief discussion on our. Let's check about the assignment questions based on our discussion so far. Isomer shift. This we will be discussing. Then, okay, isomer shift. Okay, so most of the questions are based on isomer shift in today's session. Okay, okay, so we'll go back to this discussing about first is your number of signals. So how do you find out for a particular sample? Let's say you have a iron based metal complex, and you have to find out how many signals you will get in Mosby spectra. So from your structure, from your chemical formula, how can you find out what is the structure, what is the number of signals you will get in Mosby spectroscopy? So, in Mosby spectroscopy, chemically equivalent Mosby nuclei present in the molecule will give same signal, and the chemically non-equivalent Mosby nuclei will give different signals. For example, we have these three irons in this particular molecule. So we have three irons here. So these three irons are bound to three CO, three terminal COs, and three bridging COs, all three of them. So we can say that they are equivalently bound to the ligands this CO in this particular molecule. So we can say that all three irons are chemically equivalent. Their chemical environment is same. So how many signals you will get? Oh, okay, fine. I did a mistake here. So these two of them are bound to three terminal CO and three bridge CO. But But this particular iron, this is bound to only terminal CO. So you can say that two irons are chemically equivalent and one is chemically non-equivalent. So for these two signals, so you will be getting two signals, one for one with high intensity for two Fe which are equivalent, and one less intense for your non-equivalent ion. So you will be getting two signals with the ratio of intensity ratio of 2 is to 1. Now in the next example, this is Fe2CO9. So firstly you should be knowing how to draw the structure for a from the molecular formula. So here you see that we have two irons, and both the irons are bound to three terminal CO and three bridging CO. So these are basically your equivalent iron. So you will now be getting only one signal, one intense signal. Okay. Now, if you take another example, which is of iodine, so you know your iodine is also a Mosbair active nuclei. So if you have I2Br2Cl4, so firstly you have to understand for which particular in a particular compound, uh, which of the element is Mosbair active. So here your iodine is Mosbair active, so it will give you different Mosbair spectra. Now, you can for this particular molecular formula, you can have two type of arrangements. First is first is your iodine is each of your iodine is bound to two terminal chlorines and two bridging bromines. So these are equivalent. So you will get a single peak in your Mosbair spectra. Now here it is asymmetrically bound. That is, one of your iodine is bound to bromine and Cl, but this iodine is bound only to Cl. So now you can see how the chemical environment affects the Mosbair spectroscopy. That is, your chemically equivalent nuclei will give you one signal, and non-equivalent will give you another signal. So here we will be getting two signals, each for one of the each for the each iodine atoms nuclei. Sorry. Now, this was about how many signals. So, this is the way you can find out how many signals you will be getting in a particular for a particular molecule in Mosbair spectroscopy. Now, what would be their peak positions? So, in Mosbair spectroscopy, on x-axis we have velocity, which is millimeter per second, and on the y-axis we have transmittance, percentage transmittance. So, what is this isomer shift? Isomer shift is basically it tells you about the electron and nuclear interaction. So, how your Mosbair active nuclei is interacting with the electrons in that particular molecule. So, for example, you have a let's say I'm just taking I'm taking this example we took I'm just taking a random example, so just consider it. So here you have your FeS Mosbair active nuclei. The 57 Fe is your Mosbair active nuclei. Now, Mosbair spectroscopy is all about nuclear spin states. Okay, so if this Fe, now the 57 Fe nuclei will be affected by the electronic environment around it, and mostly because it is nuclei, and the very first interaction, the the strong interaction it will experience is from s orbitals. So from s electrons, it will, with s electrons you will, it will experience electron nuclear interaction. So s orbitals can go through the nuclear interaction. Why? S defined by radial distribution function. So we'll be coming to it. Radial, this is your radial distribution function. Psi square versus your distance from the nucleus. So uh, electron, the particles has a wave function. So electron has a wave function, and the probability of psi square is basically the on y-axis we have psi square in the radial distribution function, which says about the probability of finding electron in the orbital. Now, and on the x-axis, r is the distance from the nuclei. So if you draw the radial distribution function psi square versus r for 1s orbital, um, psi square is never going to be zero. That is, the probability of finding the electron for 1s orbital is never going to be zero. That is, sorry, at r equal to 0, that is, when your distance from the nuclei, the distance of electron, 1s electron from your nuclei is 0. That is, your r is 0. So when your r is 0, your psi square is non-zero. That is, you have a certain value of psi square. That means that there is a finite possibility of finding your 1s electron in the nuclei. Probability that inner shell electron 1s orbital can penetrate the nucleus. That is, your 1s orbital electron can penetrate the nucleus. This is what radial distribution function for 1s orbital says. That means that your 1s electron can affect your nuclei, and hence it can undergo electron nuclear interaction. Now, for 2s or 2p orbitals, if we see the radial distribution function, which is so this is for 2s. So for 2s at r equal to 0, that is the when the distance from the nuclei is 0, that is when your electron is 0, is there any probability of finding 2s electrons in your nuclei? So that is 0. Your radial distribution function, your psi square is 0. So the 2s electron cannot penetrate the nuclei. Similarly, your 2p electron at r equal to 0 is 0. So that means your 2s or 2p orbital electrons cannot penetrate the nuclei. So what does it says? This says, whole concept tells you that only s orbital is important for Mosbaire spectroscopy. Your s orbital is going to affect your Mosbaire spectroscopy. Your s orbital electron distribution is going to affect the Mosbaire spectroscopy. So this is a very important point over here, and we have a question on this also in our assignment. The very first question is, isomer shift arises due to. The options are the shielding effect of PDF electrons for the S electrons. S electrons have the ability to penetrate the nucleus and have a finite lifetime. We can say finite distribution, finite probability of, we can say, uh, finite finite probability density at the nucleus. That's what I wanted to say. So finite probability density. So isomer shift arises. This was the option B. We just now discussed this. S electron have the ability to penetrate the nucleus and have finite probability density. So your option B is correct. Option C says that nucleus is so small that it cannot occupy extra electrons. This is wrong. D is the shielding effect of S electron. Uh, Shielding effect of PDF electrons. So the shielding effect of your isomer shift arises due to S electron basically, and uh, I'll explain it. The Mosbaer isomer shift, or you can say chemical shift, arises from electrostatic Coulomb interaction, electrostatic or Coulomb interaction between the nuclear charge distribution and the s electron density at the nucleus. S electron density at the nucleus. Only s orbitals have non-zero electron probability density at the nucleus. That is, they can penetrate the nucleus. PDF orbitals have zero or negligible density at the nucleus. A difference in s electron density between source and absorber changes the nuclear energy levels via electron nucleus Coulomb interaction, which produces the isomer shift. So your s electron density affects your isomer shift. So S because S electrons have the ability to penetrate the nucleus. And this is your first question. Now, moving into more details. So, this is what we just now discussed, that origin of isomer shift. The origin of isomer shift is difference in electronic environment around Mossberg active nuclei of source and sample. Electron density in s orbital is the major deciding factor in isomer shift, whereas electron density in p and d orbital will affect isomer shift by screening the s orbital. And this is your formula for isomer shift. This is how you define your isomer shift. Isomer shift is represented by delta, which is some constant into re square minus rs square into del psi s square. R, this is Re is radius of excited nucleus, Rg is radius of ground state nucleus, psi Sa s orbital electron density around absorber, and s electron density around source nucleus. So your delta is basically some constant into Re square minus Rs square into psi Sa square minus psi Ss square. So overall, you can represent it as delta R into delta psi S square. So your this delta R value can be negative and positive for based on your Mossberg active nuclei. For example, for 57 Fe nuclei, delta R is negative. So as so increase in s electron density, so increase in s electron density around sample, or you can say absorber nuclei, nucleus decrease the isomer shift will decrease the isomer shift. And increase in d electron density will increase the isomer shift. Similarly, for 119 tin, for 119 tin, delta R is positive, so increase in s electron density will increase the isomer shift, and increase in d electron density will decrease the isomer shift. Why we are talking about d electron density? Because we are talking about 3D transition elements, and third row transition element iron and tin is also in third or and tin is in fifth row. So if we are going to fill up, or like if we are going to fill up the electrons, or we are going to decrease the electron by putting some charge like positive or negative, so that all the electrons filling or removing will happen from d orbital. So that's why your d electron filling will affect your s electron density. So increase in s electron density will increase the isomer shift, and increase in d electron density will decrease the isomer shift for Sn. Now, if we take some example, for example, how to understand this particular concept. For example, you have your 119 Sn, which has a electron filling of 5s2 5. Oh, so it's a p block element. So we said, we talked about. for tin it is going to be p electron density. So for example, if we have 119 tin that is in zero oxidation state, so its electron filling is 5s2 5p2. Then we have Sn2 plus, its electron filling will be 5s2 5p0. Sn4 plus with electron filling of 5s0 and 5p0. And for these, we know that delta R is positive. So your S electron density minus S electron density of source and sample, it would be 2.5 minus 3 millimeter per second. These are experimental values. So you can see that you have tin, you have Sn2 plus, and then you have Sn4 plus. So as we discussed just now, okay, so I'm using these slides. I have to repeat it because in PDF it was a bit difficult to write. So if we have 119 Sn, this was the example we were discussing, which has a electronic valence state electron configuration of 5s2 5p2 Sn2 plus 5s2 5p0 Sn4 plus with 5s0 and 5p0. So for Sn, we know that delta R is positive. So your delta R is going to be fixed, which is positive, and your electron density, uh, psi Sa, S electron density of excited of your absorber nucleus and source nucleus, it would be 2.5 minus 3 millimeter per second, 2.5 into sorry minus 4 into millimeter per second. These are experimental values. 2 into point 2 minus point 5 millimeter per second. So what is happening? You have Sn2 plus and Sn4 plus. So we just now talked about it that for tin, since your delta R is positive, so if your S electron density increases, your isomer shift will increase. First is this, then if your P electron density increases, your isomer shift will decrease. So this is the relation you have observed from here. Now, if we see firstly here, you have a comparison on your s electron density. So, firstly, you have to check the first condition where your s electron density is more. So, if your s electron density is more, your isomer shift will be more. So, Sn and Sn2 plus will be going to have a higher isomer shift as compared to Sn4 plus. So this you have compared. Now you will compare, if your p electron density increases, your isomer shift will decrease. So among Sn and Sn2 plus, your p electron density of Sn is higher. So its isomer shift will decrease as compared to Sn2 plus. So the order will be Sn2 plus followed by Sn and then Sn4 plus. So this is how you can compare uh, which of the particular molecule will have your higher isomeric shift. This is your isomer shift order. So now based on this, if we check the question, the measurement of the isomer shift does not give any information on. First is oxidation state of the metal, spin state, electronic radius, and electronegativity of the ligands. So the right answer would be electronic radius. It does not give any information about the electronic radius of the sample. Why? Isomer shift reports on changes in s electron density on nucleus, which is sensitive to oxidation state, spin state, it affects your, which affects electron configuration and s electron density and ligand effects, which is electronegativity and covalency. So that changes electron density, these factors. It does not report on the physical electron radius of the atom, which is the you cannot get the information about the electronic radius of any sample from Mosebair isomer shift. So your option here would be C. Moving to the next question. What will be the most negative isomeric shift with respect to the metallic iron? So metallic iron is your Fe0. So we just now discussed that Fe has a delta R. The delta R is negative for Fe. Okay. So if your for iron your delta R is negative, it says that if your S electron density increases, your isomeric shift value decreases. If your D electron density increases, your delta, that is your isomeric shift value, also increases. So this is your relation. Now we have Fe2, Fe3, Fe5 and Fe6. So Fe has a electronic configuration of 3d6 4s2. Okay. For Fe2, your electronic configuration would be 3d6 4s0. Fe3, it would be 3d5 4s0. For Fe5, it is going to be 3d uh, 3 4s0. Fe6 is 3d2 4s0. So this is your your electronic configuration. From this, you can say that Fe0 has more s electron density. That is, it has two electron in your s 4s orbital. So Fe has comparatively more electron density than all the options here. Okay, so your Fe will have lowest isomeric shift. Fe0 will be the will have minimum isomeric shift. Then you move to your options. If your isomeric shift, your d orbital electron density increases, your isomeric shift increases. So the highest electron density uh, for the options are Fe2 will have highest isomeric shift, then Fe3, then Fe5, then Fe6. So this would be the order of your delta, that is isomeric shift. So what will be the most negative isomeric shift with respect to the metallic iron? So with respect to the metallic iron, most negative would be Fe6, because it is the just negative the next one in the order we discussed. So your right option would be option D, Fe6. So this is very important, this concept of Fe, S electron density and D electron density. And for tin, it is this order because delta R is positive. So that is also you have to take care of. You have to keep in mind. Now the next question is, which one should have the most negative isomer shift among them? Fe2 high spin, okay, Fe2 low spin, Fe2 electronic configuration. Firstly, we will write, which is 3d6 4s0. So for high spin, you're basically talking about the splitted states, which is T2g So among Fe2 and Fe3, it is 3d6 4s0, and it is 3d5 4s0. So both has same s electron density, but different d electron density. So higher the d electron density, higher will be the isomeric shift. So Fe2 will have higher isomeric shift than Fe3. So now we have to talk about the comparison between high spin and low spin. So here we are talking about the filling of electrons. So in Fe3, you have Fe3 is your Fe3 high spin means you have one, two, three, four, five electrons split directionally filled in all the orbitals. That is your dxy, dyz, dxz, and dx square, y square, dz square. So in these d orbitals, your electrons are uniformly distributed, and in low spin, it is kind of filled in your uh, only dxy, dyz, and dxz. That is your T2g orbitals. The electrons are filled, and your easy orbitals are vacant. So uh, this is going to be more directional, and this is going to be less directional. So always high spin, the screening capability of d orbitals will be high in high spin complexes compared to spin paired complexes, because of more directional screening. So you have your d orbitals, um like screening from all the directions in high spin complexes between, like, it is in high spin, it is screening your s orbital electron density from all the directions, but in low spin it is going to be directional. That is only along the axis it is going to screen the s electron density. So that affects your s electron density, so it is going to be your, so higher the screening, higher will be your isomer shift. So your Fe2 plus high spin will be higher than your Fe2 plus low spin, because here the d electron density is higher, so higher screening, and then your Fe2 plus Fe3 plus high spin greater than your Fe3 plus low spin. So your right option should be option D, which is Fe3 low spin. Now the fifth question is, a positive isomeric shift indicates. Here E refers to the energy of nuclear state. What does your positive isomeric shift indicates? So, so your isomer shift delta is defined with the sign convention related to the relating the energies relating the energies of the nuclear transition in absorber, that is sample and source. So with uh, with the standard Mosberg convention, standard Mosberg convention convention used here, a positive isomer shift represents nuclear transition energy in the sample being higher than that in source. That is, E sample is greater than E source, and it means greater S electron density of sample than source. So your right option would be E sample, no, sorry, not equal, E sample greater than source. So your right option should be option A. Now, the next question is, which of the following will have the highest isomer shift value? Your Fe, F2. So here, what you would see that the ligand environment is changing, and that is you have F minus, Cl minus, Br minus, I minus. So here it is about the electronegativity of the ligand. So 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 your electronegativity will be like this. This is your electronegativity order of your ligand. So as the electronegativity increases, increases as electron density decreases. Your s electron density will decrease. So as your s electron, because for iron, we just now discussed that for iron, if s electron density increases, isomeric shift will decrease, and vice versa is true. That is, when s electron density decreases, isomer shift will increase. So what will happen in this question? As the electronegativity of the ligand will increase, it will kind of reduce the s electron density. So your s electron density is decreasing, your isomeric shift will correspondingly increase. So the right order would be, for isomeric shift will be FeF2 greater than FeCl2, then FeBr2, and then FeI2. So this is your isomer shift order. So which of the following will have the highest isomer shift value? It would be option A, FeF2. Now the next question is, this is a multiple select question, MSQ. The question says, to show quadrupolar splitting for a Mosbaire active nuclear must have. Okay, so we now need to talk about the quadrupolar splitting, that is splitting of signals. So this concept we have not talked about yet. Uh, let's discuss it in the time we have left. Splitting of signals. It is your fourth parameter, quadrupole split. Sorry, third parameter, multiplicity of signals. So splitting of signals is basically quadruple, quadrupolar, quadrupolar splitting of signals. So what does it says? The Mosbaire nuclei will be quadrupolar nuclei in ground state or excited state or in both states. And the quadrupolar movement of nucleus is responsible for splitting of signals, and the splitting of signals can be studied both in presence or absence of external magnetic field. So quadrupolar or a splitting of signal can be observed if electric field gradient around nucleus is non-zero, and this non-zero electric field gradient may be due to electronic configuration, symmetry, and ligand symmetry around Mossberg nuclei. So it says that if you have electric field gradient is non-zero, your Mossberg signal will be splitted. Mm, and if your electric field gradient is zero, you will observe no splitting in the signal. And there is this selection rule for this. When your electric field gradient is zero, and when it is non-zero, there will be splitting of excited state and the transition would follow a selection rule, that is delta mi must be plus minus 1. That is transition should be from uh, there should be a transition from plus 1 by 2 to plus 3 by 2, or minus 1 by 2 to minus 3 by 2. So there must be a transition difference of plus minus 1. So if we go back to the question, to show quadrupolar splitting of Mossberg active nucleus must have quantum number greater than 1 by 2, non-zero electric field gradient. That's what we discussed. Option B is correct. That there should be non-zero for quadrupolar splitting. There should be non-zero electric field gradient, and the quantum number I, that is, it should be 0 1 by 2. So quantum number should be greater than 1 by 2. So for quadrupolar, so let me write it. Quadrupolar splitting arises from the interaction of nucleus, electric quadrupole moment q with an electric field gradient at the nucleus. And for this, two conditions are required. First is the nucleus must have, here it is given 0. The nucleus must have non zero quadrupole moment which requires nuclear spin quantum number greater than 1 by 2. And the second is non-zero electric field gradient. So the two options would be option A and B. Okay. And the last question is, electric field gradient will not come from homogeneous electric field, Coulombic charge distribution of the electron, lattice contribution, and inhomogeneous electric field. So an electric field gradient means the electric field varies with position. That is non-zero special. It is a non-zero spatial derivative. So a homogeneous electric field is uniform. That is same everywhere. So its gradient is going to be zero. It cannot produce any electric field. So will it will not come from definitely homogeneous electric field. It has to be inhomogeneous electric field. Then a spherical symmetric, that is a spherical symmetric charge distribution around the nucleus produces no directional variation, that is it is going to be uniform in all directions. So it gives no anisotropic gradient, so it does not produce any electric field gradient. So these two are the correct option, that is electric field gradient will not come from homogeneous electric field and Coulombic charge distribution. uh, so these were the questions for today's assignment. So we have discussed in details about uh, the parameters which affects the parameters of the Mosibert spectroscopy. we discussed about the fundamentals of Mosby spectroscopy, about the line width, the instrumentation, etc. And all these questions were about isomeric shift and quadrupolar splitting. We will be solving a few more questions in the next session also. So I hope you guys have been able to follow the session. If you have any doubts or if you missed out on any concept and you could not understand any concept, you can try to join the next session, and we will discuss it again. So this is it for today's session. Thank you so much for your attention.